I never thought I'd be sitting in this sterile hospital waiting room at 78, facing what could be my final surgery with none of my family by my side. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting that harsh, clinical glow that makes everything look pale and lifeless. I'm scheduled for a major heart procedure in 2 hours, and the silence around me is deafening. But this silence isn't accidental. It's the result of years of being taken for granted, of sacrifices unacknowledged, and of love that flowed only one way. My name is Margaret, and I've spent the better part of 5 decades building a life, a business, and a legacy that I foolishly assumed would be appreciated by those I loved most. I moved to Chicago in my 20s with nothing but determination and a dream to create something meaningful. Through decades of 12-hour days, missed social gatherings, and countless personal sacrifices, I built Thompson & Associates, a successful consulting firm that now employs over 40 people and generates millions in annual revenue. More importantly, I accumulated substantial real estate holdings across the city and an investment portfolio that could secure my family's future for generations. But as I sit here in this waiting room, watching other patients surrounded by worried family members, I realize that all the wealth in the world means nothing when the people you've sacrificed everything for can't even be bothered to show up when you might be drawing your last breath. The irony isn't lost on me. The very success I achieved to provide for my family has somehow made me invisible to them, as if my value is measured only in the checks I write and the problems I solve, never in the person I am. The relationship with my granddaughter Sarah had always been complicated, but it wasn't always this way. When Sarah was born, I was over the moon. Her parents, my son Michael and his wife Jennifer, were young and struggling financially, so I stepped in to help in every way I could. I paid for Sarah's private pediatrician, her quality daycare, her early childhood enrichment classes. I wanted to give her every advantage I never had growing up in a working-class family in Detroit. As Sarah grew, so did my investment in her future. I enrolled her in the best schools, paid for tutoring when she struggled with math, funded her participation in gymnastics, piano lessons, art classes, and summer camps. When she showed interest in dance during middle school, I not only paid for lessons, but bought her the expensive equipment and costumes, drove her to competitions across the Midwest, and sat through countless recitals where she rarely acknowledged my presence in the audience. During her teenage years, Sarah developed what I now recognize as an early sense of entitlement. She expected the latest technology, designer clothes, and expensive experiences without understanding the financial sacrifice these things represented. When her friends got cars for their 16th birthdays, Sarah demanded one too. I bought her a brand new Honda Civic, complete with insurance coverage that cost me nearly $3,000 annually. She totaled that car 6 months later while texting and driving, showing more concern about missing a party than about the fact that she could have killed someone. I replaced the car, of course. I also paid for the increase in insurance premiums and the legal fees when the other driver sued. Sarah's response was to complain that the replacement car wasn't as nice as the original, and to ask when she could get something more stylish like her friend's BMW. Even then, I made excuses for her behavior, telling myself she was just young and would eventually develop a sense of gratitude and responsibility. High school graduation brought another set of expectations. Sarah assumed she would attend an expensive private university, preferably somewhere prestigious like Northwestern or DePaul. She had decent grades, but nothing exceptional, and her college essay was so poorly written that I hired a professional tutor to help her rewrite it. I paid for SAT prep courses, college application fees, and campus visits to multiple schools. When Sarah was accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship, I was thrilled, until I calculated that my portion of the costs would still exceed $200,000 over 4 years. I paid every penny without complaint. Tuition, room and board, textbooks, spending money, sorority fees, spring break trips, and summer study abroad programs. Sarah changed her major 3 times, extending her graduation timeline and increasing the overall cost. She spent 5 years earning a degree in marketing that she's never really used, and throughout those 5 years, she called me primarily when she needed money transferred to her account for some new expense or emergency. But college was just the beginning. After graduation, Sarah moved back to Chicago with no clear career plans and a vague sense that the world owed her something special. She lived in my Lincoln Park townhouse for 8 months, contributing nothing to household expenses while I paid for her food, utilities, car insurance, cell phone, and personal expenses. When I gently suggested she might want to find a job and start building some independence, she accused me of being unsupportive and moved out in a dramatic huff. The apartment she moved into was beyond her means, but she signed the lease anyway, assuming I would cover the difference between her part-time retail income and her expenses. For the next 2 years, I essentially subsidized her lifestyle while she figured out what she wanted to do with her life. The subsidies included rent assistance, car payments, credit card debt relief, medical expenses, and a steady stream of emergency funds for everything from vet bills to vacation expenses. Sarah's pattern was always the same. She would make impulsive decisions without considering the financial consequences, then turn to me for rescue when reality set in. She bought expensive clothes she couldn't afford, adopted pets without considering the ongoing costs, took trips with friends while her bills went unpaid, and consistently lived as if money was an unlimited resource that would always be available when she needed it. The yoga instructor phase was particularly expensive. Sarah decided she wanted to teach yoga after taking a few classes at an upscale studio. I funded her $2,000 certification program, helped her lease studio space for $1,800 per month, and provided the initial operating capital for equipment, marketing, and business setup. Sarah approached the business with typical enthusiasm and minimal planning, offering classes at random times, failing to build a consistent client base, and generally treating the studio like an expensive hobby rather than a legitimate business venture. When the yoga studio failed after 8 months, Sarah owed back rent, had defaulted on equipment loans, and faced several $1,000s in outstanding business expenses. I covered all of these costs while she pivoted to her next passion project, a photography business that required expensive camera equipment, editing software, and another round of marketing materials. The photography business lasted 6 months before she decided it was too stressful and abandoned it for the acting dreams that took her to Los Angeles. The Los Angeles adventure was perhaps the most expensive of Sarah's ventures. She moved there with no contacts, no agent, no clear plan beyond a vague notion that she would break into the industry. I paid for her moving expenses, first and last month's rent on an overpriced apartment in West Hollywood, and provided monthly supplements to cover her living expenses while she waited tables and went to auditions that rarely materialized. Sarah's time in Los Angeles was marked by the same pattern of impulsive decisions and financial irresponsibility that had characterized her entire adult life. She bought expensive headshots from a photographer who promised to make her famous, enrolled in acting classes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and consistently overspent on everything from organic groceries to designer workout clothes that she needed for her image. When Sarah returned to Chicago after 6 months, she owed money to multiple creditors, had no savings, and no clear explanation for why her acting career had failed to launch. She was also bitter and resentful, somehow blaming everyone except herself for the fact that moving to Los Angeles with no experience, no connections, and no realistic plan had not resulted in immediate stardom. She's 31 now, beautiful and intelligent, but somewhere along the way, she developed this sense of entitlement that I find both heartbreaking and infuriating. Sarah graduated from Northwestern University, tuition paid entirely by me, with a degree in marketing that she's never really used. Instead, she spent the last decade floating from one relationship to another, one apartment to another, one crisis to another, always with her hand extended toward me for the next bailout. I've helped Sarah through evictions, car repossessions, credit card debt, and failed business ventures. When she decided she wanted to be a yoga instructor, I funded her certification and helped her lease a studio space. When that failed after 8 months, I covered her losses and helped her transition to whatever came next. When she announced she was moving to Los Angeles to pursue acting, I provided the moving expenses and 3 months of rent. When she returned to Chicago 6 months later, tail between her legs, I welcomed her back without a single "I told you so." But it was never enough. Sarah never seemed to understand that my resources, while substantial, weren't infinite. More importantly, she never seemed to grasp that my willingness to help came from love, not obligation. Every conversation we had eventually circled back to money, what she needed, what emergency had arisen, what opportunity required my financial backing. I began to feel less like a grandmother and more like a personal ATM, dispensing cash and solving problems while receiving little in return except the promise that this time will be different. What made Sarah's behavior particularly painful was how it contrasted with my memories of my own grandmother, Rose. Grandma Rose had very little money, but she gave me something far more valuable: her time, attention, and unconditional emotional support. When my parents were fighting, I could always escape to Grandma Rose's small apartment where she would make me grilled cheese sandwiches and listen to my problems without judgment. She taught me to knit, helped me with homework, and attended every school play and sports event, despite working 2 jobs to support herself. Grandma Rose never had the resources to solve my problems with money, but she solved them with presence, wisdom, and love. When I was bullied at school, she taught me strategies for dealing with difficult people. When I was heartbroken over my first boyfriend, she shared stories from her own youth that helped me understand that pain was temporary. When I was worried about college costs, she helped me research scholarships and encouraged me to work part-time to contribute to my own education. I wanted to give Sarah both what Grandma Rose had given me, love and attention, and what I could provide that my grandmother couldn't: financial security and unlimited opportunities. Instead, Sarah seemed to absorb the financial benefits while remaining indifferent to the emotional relationship. She rarely asked about my life, my work, my health, or my feelings. Our conversations were transactional, focused on her immediate needs rather than any genuine connection. The breaking point came 3 months ago, during what I thought would be a routine Sunday dinner at my Lincoln Park townhouse. Sarah arrived late as usual, looking polished and put together in clothes I'd helped her afford. She was dating someone new, a struggling musician named Tyler who she'd met at some coffee shop in Logan Square. I'd heard bits and pieces about Tyler over the past few weeks, mostly requests for me to understand why Sarah needed help covering her rent because she was supporting Tyler's music career. Tyler, from what I could gather, was 28 years old and had been pursuing music for the better part of a decade without any notable success. He lived in a shared apartment with 3 other aspiring artists, worked sporadically as a food delivery driver, and had convinced Sarah that he was on the verge of a breakthrough that just required the right financial backing. Sarah described him as talented and passionate, but couldn't provide specifics about his musical accomplishments beyond playing at a few open mic nights and posting videos on social media. During dinner, Sarah casually mentioned that she and Tyler were planning to move in together and that Tyler had some amazing opportunities coming up that just needed a little financial backing to get off the ground. She had the entire pitch rehearsed. Tyler was supposedly on the verge of signing with a record label. He just needed to finish recording his demo, and the studio time would cost $8,000. Sarah presented this as if it were a guaranteed investment rather than what it obviously was. Another in a long line of requests for me to fund her poor choices. What struck me most about Sarah's presentation was how little she seemed to know about Tyler's actual musical abilities or business prospects. She couldn't name the record label that was supposedly interested in him, didn't know the details of the recording contract he claimed to be negotiating, and had no timeline for when this investment would be recouped. She was asking me to fund the dreams of a man she'd known for 3 months, based on promises and possibilities rather than any concrete evidence of talent or potential. When I gently suggested that perhaps Tyler should seek funding through traditional channels, bank loans, investors, even crowdfunding, Sarah's demeanor shifted immediately. She accused me of being unsupportive and closed-minded about Tyler's talent. She claimed I was being deliberately difficult because I didn't want her to be happy. The conversation escalated quickly, with Sarah ultimately storming out of my house after shouting that I was a bitter old woman who used money to control people. The accusation that I used money to control people was particularly hurtful because it represented such a fundamental misunderstanding of my motivations. I had never attached strings to my financial support, never demanded specific behaviors or outcomes in exchange for help. I gave freely because I loved Sarah and wanted her to have opportunities and security. The idea that my generosity was somehow manipulative or controlling revealed how little Sarah understood about love, sacrifice, or gratitude. That was the last time I saw her. In the 3 months since that dinner, I've called Sarah dozens of times, left voicemails, sent text messages. I've reached out through mutual friends and even contacted her mother, my daughter-in-law Jennifer, to try to understand what was happening. Jennifer, who has always been somewhat spineless when it comes to Sarah's behavior, mumbled something about Sarah needing space to figure things out and suggested I should maybe consider helping Tyler with his music career if I wanted to repair the relationship. Jennifer's response was telling because it revealed the family dynamic that had enabled Sarah's entitled behavior for so many years. Rather than encouraging Sarah to apologize for her disrespectful outburst or to reconsider her unreasonable demands, Jennifer was suggesting that I should capitulate to Sarah's wishes in order to restore peace. This pattern of accommodating Sarah's bad behavior rather than addressing it had been going on for decades, and I realized I had been complicit in creating the monster that Sarah had become. The silence from Sarah has been absolute. No returned calls. No acknowledgement of my birthday last month. No response when I sent her a card for her birthday 2 weeks ago. It's as if I simply ceased to exist the moment I declined to write a check for her boyfriend's dubious musical ambitions. The cruelest part is that I know Sarah is fine. I see her posts on social media, pictures of her and Tyler at restaurants, concerts, social gatherings. She's living her life, apparently unburdened by concern for the grandmother who raised her after her parents' messy divorce, who paid for her education, who supported her through every crisis and celebration for 3 decades. Looking at those social media posts has been its own form of torture. Sarah and Tyler appear to be enjoying an active social life, eating at expensive restaurants, attending concerts and festivals, taking weekend trips to places like Milwaukee and Madison. The lifestyle they're maintaining clearly exceeds what Sarah could afford on her part-time income from the boutique where she works, which suggests she's either found another source of financial support or is accumulating debt that she expects someone else to eventually cover. 2 weeks ago, I started experiencing chest pains that I initially dismissed as stress. The timing seemed significant. The pains began shortly after I saw photos of Sarah and Tyler at what appeared to be an expensive lakefront resort, celebrating Tyler's record deal that had supposedly come through. The photos showed them drinking champagne and toasting their future, and I couldn't help but wonder if my refusal to fund Tyler's music career had actually motivated him to work harder, or if Sarah had found someone else to exploit. But when the pains became more frequent and severe, my doctor ordered a series of tests that revealed significant blockages in my coronary arteries. The surgery I'm facing today, a triple bypass, is serious, with real risks. There's a chance I might not wake up from the anesthesia, and if I do, the recovery will be long and difficult. The irony is that stress, much of it caused by Sarah's behavior and our estrangement, likely contributed to my cardiac problems. I called Sarah when I received the diagnosis. I left a voicemail explaining the situation, the surgery date, and asked her to call me back. That was 10 days ago. Silence. I sent a text message with the same information 5 days ago. Nothing. Yesterday, I had Jennifer call Sarah to inform her about the surgery. Jennifer reported back that Sarah got the message but didn't elaborate on any response or plans to visit. Jennifer's report of her conversation with Sarah was particularly infuriating. According to Jennifer, Sarah's initial response was to ask whether I was really sick or just being dramatic for attention. The question revealed not only Sarah's fundamental selfishness, but also her complete inability to understand that some situations aren't about her. Even when faced with news of my potentially life-threatening medical condition, Sarah's first instinct was to question whether it was genuine or manipulative. When Jennifer confirmed that the surgery was real and serious, Sarah reportedly said she needed time to process the information and would figure out what to do. The idea that my medical emergency required Sarah to figure out what to do, rather than simply inspiring her to immediately offer support, speaks volumes about how thoroughly our relationship had deteriorated. A normal granddaughter would have been on the next plane to Chicago. Sarah was treating my heart surgery like a complex problem that required careful consideration. And so here I sit, alone in this waiting room, watching families console each other, hold hands, offer the kind of support that I apparently don't deserve after a lifetime of loving too much and expecting too little in return. The nurse will call my name soon, and I'll walk down that hallway to the operating room by myself, not knowing if I'll ever walk back out. The other families in this waiting room provide a stark contrast to my situation. To my left, 3 generations of a Mexican-American family are gathered around a patriarch who's having gallbladder surgery. The man's children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren have taken time off work and school to be here. They've brought homemade food, card games, and enough love to fill the entire waiting area. The youngest grandchild, a girl about 6 years old, made her grandfather a hand-drawn card that says "Get well soon, abuelo," in purple crayon. To my right, an elderly Italian woman is surrounded by what appears to be her entire extended family as she waits for news about her husband's surgery. Her daughters are taking turns holding her hands, her sons are handling logistics and communication with the medical staff, and her grandchildren are quietly entertaining the youngest family members to keep them calm. Every few minutes, someone brings her coffee, adjusts her blanket, or simply sits with her in companionable silence. Watching these families has made me realize something important. The love and support surrounding these patients isn't just about crisis response. It's the culmination of decades of mutual care, respect, and investment in each other's lives. These families show up for surgery day because they've been showing up for each other all along. They've built relationships based on genuine affection and reciprocal support, not just financial transactions and one-sided giving. But here's what Sarah doesn't know, what none of them know. 3 weeks ago, I updated my will. I spent hours with my attorney, Richard Kellerman, completely restructuring my estate plan. The changes are comprehensive and, frankly, devastating for anyone who assumed they could simply wait for me to die and inherit everything I've worked for. The process of updating my will was emotionally exhausting, but ultimately liberating. Richard, who has handled my legal affairs for 15 years, was initially hesitant to make such dramatic changes. He suggested that I might want to wait, to give Sarah time to apologize or reconcile, to reconsider such permanent decisions during a period of emotional stress. But I explained to him that this wasn't a decision made in anger. It was a decision made with clarity. I asked Richard to help me research the organizations and institutions that would benefit from my estate to ensure my money would go to people and causes that would use it meaningfully. We spent weeks investigating children's hospitals, educational scholarship programs, employee ownership structures, and charities that support elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. I wanted to make sure every dollar would make a difference in the lives of people who understood the value of opportunity and support. The house in Lincoln Park, worth $2.8 million, is no longer going to Sarah. Instead, it's being donated to the Chicago Children's Hospital, along with a substantial endowment to fund pediatric cardiac surgeries for underprivileged children. The irony of donating my estate to help children whose families actually show up for them isn't lost on me. The Children's Hospital donation was inspired by my visits there during my own cardiac workup. I saw families camping out in waiting rooms, sleeping in recliners, organizing their entire lives around their sick children's needs. I saw parents who hadn't been home in weeks, siblings who were missing school to provide support, grandparents who drove hundreds of miles just to sit quietly beside hospital beds. These families understood instinctively what Sarah had never learned, that love requires presence, not just promises. My business, Thompson & Associates, is being transferred to my employees through an employee stock ownership plan. These are people who've worked alongside me for years, who've shown loyalty, dedication, and genuine appreciation for the opportunities I've provided. They've earned a piece of the company far more than someone who couldn't be bothered to return a phone call when I needed her most. The decision to transfer ownership to my employees was easy once I started paying attention to how they treated me compared to how Sarah treated me. My office manager, Patricia, calls me every morning to check on my energy level and adjust my schedule if I'm having a difficult day. My lead consultant, James, has offered multiple times to drive me to medical appointments. My entire staff sent flowers when I was diagnosed, and they've been covering my responsibilities without complaint while I prepare for surgery. These employees have shown me more care and consideration in the past month than Sarah has shown me in the past year. They appreciate the opportunities I've given them. They respect the business we've built together, and they understand that success requires effort and commitment. They've earned their inheritance through years of mutual respect and shared achievement. My investment portfolio, worth roughly $2 million, is being divided among several charities that support women in business, educational scholarships for underprivileged students, and organizations that provide care for elderly people who've been abandoned by their families. I want my money to go to people who understand the value of effort, kindness, and showing up when it matters. The scholarship program I'm endowing will specifically support first-generation college students who demonstrate both academic potential and genuine appreciation for educational opportunities. I want to help young people who understand that education is a privilege, not an entitlement, who will work hard to make the most of the chances they're given. The contrast with Sarah, who treated her expensive education as just another thing she deserved rather than something she should value, is intentional. The elder care organization I'm supporting provides companionship and assistance to elderly people whose families have disappeared from their lives. These are people who worked hard, raised children, built communities, and contributed to society, only to find themselves forgotten when they needed care and support. I understand their situation intimately, and I want my money to ensure they receive the attention and respect they deserve. Sarah will receive exactly $1 from my estate, not to be cruel, but to make it legally clear that she wasn't forgotten or overlooked. She was deliberately excluded. The will includes a detailed explanation of why these decisions were made, specifically citing her 3-month abandonment of me during my health crisis as the final evidence that she views me as nothing more than a source of financial support. The letter I've written to accompany Sarah's $1 inheritance is perhaps the most difficult document I've ever created. In it, I explain not just the immediate circumstances that led to her disinheritance, but the years of entitled behavior, financial exploitation, and emotional neglect that made this decision inevitable. I want Sarah to understand that losing her inheritance isn't punishment for a single argument. It's the consequence of a lifetime of choices that prioritized her wants over my worth. If you're watching this and you're currently taking someone for granted, maybe an aging parent, a generous grandparent, or anyone who's consistently shown up for you, I want you to understand something crucial. Love has an expiration date when it's not reciprocated. There comes a moment when even the most devoted person realizes they deserve better than being treated as a convenience rather than a human being. I spent 31 years loving Sarah unconditionally, supporting her dreams, funding her mistakes, and believing that someday she'd mature into someone who could love me back with even a fraction of the intensity I loved her. I was wrong. Some people are simply incapable of genuine gratitude or reciprocal affection. They take and take until there's nothing left to give, then disappear when you need them most. The nursing staff has been incredibly kind to me today. They've checked on me repeatedly, offered comfort, and assured me that the surgical team is excellent. It's strange to receive more compassion from strangers doing their jobs than from the granddaughter I helped raise. It makes me realize that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes the people who care about you most are the ones who choose to be in your life rather than the ones who are obligated to be there. If I don't survive this surgery, I take comfort in knowing that my life's work will benefit people who deserve it. The children who receive life-saving heart surgery because of my donation will have families who appreciate every extra day they get together. The employees who inherit my business will understand the value of the opportunity they've been given. The scholarship recipients will use their education to build meaningful lives rather than squandering opportunities. As I sit here waiting for my name to be called, I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires energy I don't have and focuses on people who've proven they're not worth my emotional investment. Instead, I feel a strange sense of peace about the decisions I've made. For the first time in years, I know that my resources are going to people who will value them, appreciate them, and use them to make the world a little bit better. The surgeon, Dr. Martinez, stopped by 30 minutes ago to review the procedure one final time. He's confident about the surgery's success, but he was honest about the risks. There's always a chance of complications with any major cardiac surgery, especially at my age. He asked if there was anyone I wanted him to call after the surgery, anyone who should be notified about my condition. I told him no, that there wasn't anyone waiting to hear from me. That's not entirely true, of course. There are people who care about me. My employees, my neighbors, the few friends I've maintained over the years, despite being consumed by Sarah's endless crises. But none of them are sitting in this waiting room because none of them knew how serious today would be. I didn't want to burden them with worry, and perhaps foolishly, I kept hoping that Sarah would somehow come through at the last moment. Dr. Martinez seemed surprised when I told him I had no family to contact. He's probably accustomed to dealing with patients who have extensive support networks, people whose families coordinate care and make collective decisions about treatment options. The idea of facing major surgery alone probably seems unusual to him, maybe even tragic. But I've learned that being alone by choice is preferable to being surrounded by people who don't genuinely care about your well-being. But as the minutes tick by, and my name moves closer to the top of the surgery list, I'm accepting that Sarah has made her choice. She's chosen her pride, her boyfriend, and her resentment over showing up for the woman who spent 3 decades putting her needs first. That choice will cost her approximately $7.2 million, but more importantly, it will cost her the chance to say goodbye to the only person who loved her unconditionally. Hey, I'm curious to know where you're watching this from. Drop a comment below with your city and country. I love hearing from viewers around the world. The waiting room has filled up and emptied several times since I arrived. I've watched families reunite after successful surgeries, seen tears of joy and relief, witnessed the kind of love and support that I always hoped would surround me in moments like this. Each reunion reminds me of what I'm missing, but it also reinforces my conviction that my decisions are correct. There's a young woman across from me, probably about Sarah's age, who's been here since early morning, waiting for news about her grandmother's surgery. She's called in sick to work, brought a bag of snacks, and has spent the entire day in this uncomfortable chair just to be here when her grandmother wakes up. Every few hours, she walks to the nurse's station to check for updates, not because she's impatient, but because she cares. That's what love looks like. That's what family should be. I think about all the times Sarah claimed she was too busy to visit, all the canceled dinners, all the promises to catch up soon that never materialized. I think about how she always had time for whatever crisis or adventure was consuming her attention, but never had time for a quiet afternoon with the grandmother who'd given her everything. I realize now that I enabled this behavior by accepting it, by making excuses for her, by convincing myself that her youth or her struggles justified her selfishness. The truth is, Sarah is 31 years old. She's not a child anymore, and her behavior isn't the result of immaturity. It's the result of character flaws that I was too loving to acknowledge. She's selfish, entitled, and manipulative, and no amount of money or patience was ever going to change those fundamental aspects of her personality. I spent 3 decades trying to love her into becoming a better person. But you can't love someone into growing a conscience. Dr. Martinez's nurse just called my name. It's time. As I stand up from this plastic chair that's been my companion for the past 4 hours, I take one last look around the waiting room. Part of me still hopes to see Sarah rushing through those double doors, apologetic and worried, ready to hold my hand as they wheel me into surgery. But the doors remain closed, and the only person standing up is me. I follow the nurse down the hallway toward the preoperative area, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors. The hallway is lined with motivational posters about healing and hope, but I find my hope in knowing that I've finally taken control of my own story. For too long, I allowed Sarah to dictate the terms of our relationship, always hoping she'd eventually reciprocate my love and commitment. Now, for perhaps the first time in our relationship, I'm the one making the choices. The preoperative room is small and cold, with that distinctive hospital smell of disinfectant and anxiety. The anesthesiologist, a kind woman named Dr. Chen, explains the process while nurses prepare my IV and attach monitoring equipment. Everyone is professional and compassionate, and I find myself thinking that these strangers are treating me with more care and consideration than my own granddaughter has shown me in months. As the anesthesia begins to take effect, my last conscious thought is about the envelope I left on my kitchen counter. It's a letter I wrote to Sarah last night, explaining everything: my disappointment, my hurt, my final decision about the inheritance. I've instructed my attorney to deliver it to her only if I don't survive the surgery. If I do survive, I'll have to decide whether she deserves an explanation or if her actions have spoken loudly enough to make words unnecessary. The surgery was successful. I woke up 6 hours later in the cardiac intensive care unit, connected to more machines than I care to count, but alive and stable. The first face I saw was Dr. Martinez, smiling broadly as he explained that the bypass went perfectly and that my prognosis was excellent. The second face I saw was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had somehow learned about my surgery and came to check on me. Mrs. Patterson, who is 75 and has her own health issues, took a taxi to the hospital to sit with me during recovery. She brought homemade soup, a book of crossword puzzles, and the kind of genuine concern that Sarah couldn't be bothered to offer. As I lay there, weak but grateful, I realized that Mrs. Patterson had shown me more family love in one afternoon than Sarah had shown me in the past year. Mrs. Patterson explained that she'd been worried when she didn't see me for several days and had contacted the building manager to check on me. When she learned about the surgery, she immediately cleared her schedule and came to the hospital. She'd been in the waiting room for 4 hours, reading a book and occasionally checking with nurses for updates on my condition. Her dedication made Sarah's absence even more glaring and painful. Over the next 3 days in the hospital, I received visits from 6 of my employees, 4 neighbors, my dentist's office manager, who'd heard about the surgery through mutual acquaintances, and even the teenager who delivers my groceries. None of these people owed me anything, yet all of them took time from their lives to check on my recovery. The contrast with Sarah's continued silence was stark and heartbreaking. My employee James brought me financial documents that needed my attention, but spent most of his visit just talking about his family, his concerns for my health, and his gratitude for the opportunities I'd given him over the years. Patricia organized a rotation schedule among the staff to ensure someone would check on me regularly during my recovery. These gestures of care and support highlighted what I'd been missing from my relationship with Sarah. On my final day in the hospital, Jennifer finally called. She'd heard about the surgery from someone at her yoga studio. Apparently word had spread through our social network despite my attempts at privacy, and wanted to check in. During our conversation, she mentioned that Sarah was going through a difficult time and was dealing with a lot of stress about her relationship with Tyler. Jennifer suggested that perhaps Sarah's absence wasn't personal, that she was just processing her emotions about my health scare. I listened to Jennifer's explanations and excuses with the clarity that comes from facing your own mortality. Every word confirmed what I already knew. Sarah's selfishness was so ingrained that even my potentially life-threatening surgery couldn't penetrate her self-absorption. Jennifer's willingness to make excuses for Sarah's behavior showed me exactly where Sarah learned that her actions didn't have consequences. When I asked Jennifer directly whether Sarah had expressed any concern about my surgery or any intention to visit me, Jennifer's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Sarah had apparently asked whether I was really sick and had wondered aloud whether my surgery was as serious as Grandma Margaret is making it sound. The fact that Sarah was questioning the legitimacy of my medical emergency rather than simply offering support was the final confirmation I needed about her character. I was discharged from the hospital on a Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Patterson drove me home and helped me get settled, ensuring I had everything I needed for the first few days of recovery. As she prepared to leave, she mentioned that a young woman had been by the house twice in the past week, looking upset and asking questions about whether I was okay. Mrs. Patterson hadn't recognized her, but from the description, it was clearly Sarah. So Sarah knew about the surgery. She knew I was in the hospital. She'd even come by the house, probably trying to figure out what was happening. But she still hadn't called, hadn't visited, hadn't made any effort to actually connect with me. Her behavior suggested that she was experiencing some kind of guilt or concern, but not enough to overcome her pride or stubbornness. It was the final confirmation I needed that my decisions about the inheritance were correct. That evening, sitting in my living room surrounded by flowers and cards from people who actually cared about my well-being, I called my attorney. I had him add one final provision to my will, a requirement that Sarah complete 100 hours of community service with elderly patients at a local nursing home before she could claim even her symbolic $1 inheritance. If she wants any connection to my estate, she'll have to learn what it means to show up for people who need care and support. The community service requirement wasn't meant to be vindictive, it was meant to be educational. I wanted Sarah to spend time with elderly people who've been abandoned by their families, to see what loneliness and neglect actually look like, to understand the difference between people who choose to be alone and people who have been discarded by those they loved. Maybe spending time caring for others would teach her something about empathy and responsibility that 31 years of my unconditional love had failed to instill. The recovery process has been long, but manageable. I've had to hire a part-time caregiver for the first month, a wonderful woman named Carmen who has become more like family than hired help. Carmen has a granddaughter about Sarah's age who calls her every single day, visits twice a week, and brings her great-grandmother flowers just because. Watching their relationship has shown me what my relationship with Sarah could have been, should have been, but will never be. Carmen's granddaughter, Isabella, is a nursing student who works part-time while completing her degree. Despite her busy schedule, she makes time to cook dinner for Carmen every Sunday, helps with grocery shopping, and regularly brings her textbooks over to study while keeping her grandmother company. Isabella clearly adores Carmen, seeking her advice about school, relationships, and career decisions. Their conversations are filled with genuine interest in each other's lives, mutual respect, and obvious affection. Watching Isabella and Carmen together has been both healing and heartbreaking. It shows me that the grandmother-granddaughter relationship I always wanted with Sarah was possible, just not with Sarah. Isabella treats Carmen like a treasured advisor and friend, not just an elderly relative to be tolerated. She brings Carmen small gifts, remembers important dates, and shares details about her life because she wants Carmen to feel included and valued. The contrast with Sarah couldn't be more stark. Where Isabella calls Carmen daily, Sarah went months without contacting me. Where Isabella seeks Carmen's advice and values her wisdom, Sarah always acted like my opinions were outdated and irrelevant. Where Isabella brings flowers and small surprises, Sarah only showed up when she needed something. Carmen gets the love and respect I always hoped to receive from Sarah, and Isabella gets the emotional support and wisdom that Sarah rejected. It's been 2 months since the surgery, and Sarah has still not contacted me. I've seen her car parked outside my house 3 different times, suggesting she's driven by but hasn't worked up the courage or swallowed enough pride to actually knock on my door. Her behavior reminds me of a child who knows she's done something wrong but is too stubborn to apologize. Except Sarah is a grown woman whose stubbornness is costing her a fortune and any chance of reconciliation. The fact that Sarah has driven by multiple times but never approached the door tells me everything I need to know about her character and her motivations. If she were genuinely concerned about my health and well-being, she would have called or knocked on the door after the first drive-by. If she were truly sorry about our argument and wanted to reconcile, she would have swallowed her pride and made contact. Instead, she's engaging in the behavior of someone who's curious about my condition, but not committed to doing anything meaningful about it. I suspect Sarah's drive-bys are motivated more by guilt and curiosity than by love or concern. She probably knows she should reach out, feels some obligation to check on me, but can't bring herself to actually take responsibility for her behavior or make the effort that reconciliation would require. It's easier to drive by and tell herself she's monitoring the situation than to face the reality of what her choices have cost both of us. Last week, Tyler's music career apparently ended when Sarah discovered he'd been cheating on her with another woman he'd convinced to invest in his artistic vision. According to Jennifer, who heard it through their complex family gossip network, Sarah is devastated and has moved back in with her mother temporarily. Part of me, the grandmother part that spent 31 years loving her, feels sorry for her pain. But the larger part of me recognizes this as just another in a long line of predictable disasters that Sarah will expect someone else to fix. The details of Tyler's betrayal, as relayed by Jennifer, were both predictable and pathetic. Tyler had apparently been running the same investment in my music career scam on multiple women simultaneously, promising each of them that they were supporting his breakthrough while using their money to fund his lifestyle. Sarah discovered the cheating when she found text messages on Tyler's phone from another woman, thanking him for the amazing weekend in Nashville that was supposedly a business trip to meet with record producers. When Sarah confronted Tyler, he initially tried to gaslight her, claiming the text messages were taken out of context and that the other woman was just a business contact. But Sarah found evidence of at least 2 other women who'd been financially supporting Tyler's music career, along with receipts for expensive purchases that he'd made with their money. Tyler's entire persona as a struggling artist on the verge of success was apparently a carefully constructed lie designed to exploit vulnerable women. The worst part, according to Jennifer, was that Tyler showed no remorse when his deception was exposed. He actually blamed Sarah for not being supportive enough and claimed that he'd been forced to seek support elsewhere because she didn't believe in his talent. Even when caught red-handed cheating and lying, Tyler managed to make himself the victim and Sarah the villain. The manipulation was so blatant that even Sarah, who'd been completely taken in by his act, couldn't ignore it. If Sarah had been in my life these past few months, I probably would have helped her through this breakup, offered emotional support, and maybe even financial assistance to help her get back on her feet. I would have told her that Tyler was obviously using her, that she deserved better, that this experience would make her stronger. I would have opened my home and my heart to help her heal, just like I'd done dozens of times before. But Sarah chose to cut me out of her life over my refusal to fund Tyler's music career. She chose her pride over her family, her resentment over her relationships, her stubbornness over my love. Now she gets to face the consequences of Tyler's betrayal alone, without the support system she thoughtlessly discarded when she decided I wasn't worth her time. The irony is particularly bitter because my refusal to invest in Tyler's music career was clearly the right decision. Tyler was exactly what I suspected he was, a manipulative user who preyed on women's emotions and generosity. If Sarah had listened to my concerns instead of dismissing them as close-mindedness, she could have avoided months of exploitation and heartbreak. But Sarah was so invested in proving me wrong that she ignored obvious red flags and set herself up for inevitable disappointment. My health continues to improve steadily. Dr. Martinez is pleased with my recovery, and I'm getting stronger every week. I've returned to work part-time, managing my business from home and slowly transitioning more responsibilities to my employees as we prepare for the ownership transfer. Watching them step up to take on greater roles has been incredibly fulfilling. These are people who appreciate opportunity and work hard to deserve the trust I place in them. The transition process has revealed just how capable and dedicated my employees really are. Patricia has taken on additional administrative responsibilities without complaint, working extra hours to ensure nothing falls through the cracks during my recovery. James has been leading client meetings and presentations, demonstrating leadership skills I always knew he possessed but never had the chance to fully utilize. The entire team has rallied together to maintain our high standards and continue serving our clients effectively. What's particularly gratifying is seeing how much my employees value the opportunity to have ownership in the company. They're not just working harder, they're thinking more strategically, taking initiative, and investing emotionally in the business's success in ways they never did when they were simply employees. The employee stock ownership plan isn't just changing their financial future, it's transforming their entire relationship with their work and with each other. I've also become more involved in the charities that will benefit from my estate. I've visited the Children's Hospital several times, meeting young patients who are facing heart surgeries similar to mine. Their families never leave their sides. Parents sleep in uncomfortable chairs. Siblings sacrifice their own activities to visit. Grandparents drive hours just to provide support. These families understand what love looks like, what showing up means, what really matters when someone you care about is facing a crisis. During one hospital visit, I met a 7-year-old boy named Marcus, who was waiting for his second heart surgery. His entire extended family had organized their lives around his medical needs, taking turns staying at the hospital, coordinating care, and ensuring he was never alone. Marcus's grandmother, Mrs. Johnson, had driven 8 hours from St. Louis just to be there for his surgery. She brought homemade cookies, his favorite books, and a handmade quilt that she'd been working on during his first hospitalization. Mrs. Johnson and I talked for hours about the challenges of loving someone who needs extensive medical care. She spoke about the financial strain, the emotional exhaustion, the way Marcus's illness had brought their family closer together rather than driving them apart. She couldn't understand when I mentioned that I'd faced my own surgery alone, couldn't fathom how a family member could prioritize pride or resentment over showing up for someone they claimed to love. The scholarship program I'm funding has also become a source of great satisfaction. I've met several of the first recipients, all first-generation college students who understand that education is a privilege rather than an entitlement. These young people work multiple jobs while maintaining excellent grades, send money home to help their families, and express genuine gratitude for the opportunities they've been given. The contrast with Sarah's attitude toward her expensive education is profound and validating. One scholarship recipient, Maria Gonzalez, is studying to become a pediatric nurse while working weekends at her family's restaurant. She writes me detailed letters about her studies, her career goals, and her gratitude for the scholarship support. Maria's letters are filled with specific examples of how the scholarship has impacted her life, the textbooks she could afford, the clinical experiences she could pursue, the extra time she could dedicate to studying instead of working additional shifts. Maria's appreciation and work ethic remind me of my own college experience, when every opportunity felt precious because it was hard-won. I worked multiple jobs to pay for my education, lived on ramen noodles and determination, and treated every class as an investment in my future. Sarah, who had every advantage handed to her, never developed that same sense of appreciation or understanding of opportunity's value. The woman I've become since Sarah's abandonment is stronger, clearer, and more decisive than the grandmother who spent 3 decades making excuses for unacceptable behavior. I no longer waste emotional energy hoping for phone calls that won't come or visits that won't happen. I no longer interpret silence as anything other than the clear communication it actually is. I no longer convince myself that love alone can change someone who doesn't want to be changed. This transformation hasn't been easy or painless. There are still moments when I miss the Sarah I thought I knew, when I wish things could have been different, when I grieve for the relationship that might have been possible if she'd been capable of genuine love and appreciation. But these moments of sadness are balanced by a growing sense of peace about my decisions and pride in the legacy I'm creating. I've also found unexpected freedom in no longer being responsible for Sarah's emotional and financial welfare. For the first time in decades, I can make decisions based on my own needs and values rather than constantly considering how my choices might affect Sarah's comfort or convenience. I can spend money on things I enjoy rather than always keeping reserves available for her next crisis. I can make plans without wondering if Sarah will need something that requires me to change them. The friends and neighbors who've supported me through my recovery have commented on the positive changes they see in me. Mrs. Patterson says I seem lighter and more relaxed. Carmen notices that I smile more often and seem less worried about my phone. Even my employees have mentioned that I appear more confident and decisive in business matters. It's as if removing the constant stress of Sarah's drama and demands has allowed my authentic self to emerge. As I finish recording this story, I want to make something absolutely clear to anyone who might be watching and thinking about their own family relationships. Love is not supposed to be one-sided. Generosity is not supposed to be taken for granted. Support is not supposed to be expected without reciprocation. If you have people in your life who show up for you, who care about your well-being, who make effort to maintain your relationship, treasure them. And if you have people in your life who only contact you when they need something, who disappear when you need them, who treat your love as an entitlement rather than a gift, please understand that you deserve better. The hardest lesson I've learned is that some relationships are worth fighting for, while others are worth walking away from. The difference isn't always obvious, especially when love and history complicate your perspective. But there comes a point when you have to ask yourself, does this person enhance my life or drain it? Do they appreciate my presence or take it for granted? Do they show up for me the way I show up for them? Sarah will learn about her inheritance when my will is read, probably years from now. She'll discover that her 3 months of silence cost her a fortune, but more importantly, it cost her the last chance to have a relationship with someone who loved her unconditionally. She'll realize that her pride was expensive, that her stubbornness was costly, that her taking me for granted was the biggest mistake of her life. When that day comes, Sarah will probably be angry. She'll claim the inheritance was rightfully hers, that my decision was unfair, that I was manipulative or vindictive. She'll tell people that I used money to control her, that I was bitter and unforgiving, that I should have been more understanding of her perspective. She'll make herself the victim in a story where she was actually the villain. But by then, it will be too late. Not because I'll be gone. I plan to live many more years, surrounded by people who actually appreciate my presence in their lives, but because some choices can't be undone. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once destroyed by selfishness and neglect, can't be repaired with apologies or regret. The money Sarah will lose pales in comparison to what she's already lost. The love, wisdom, and support of someone who would have been there for her through every challenge and celebration for the rest of her life. She traded a grandmother's unconditional love for a boyfriend's conditional promises, and she'll spend the rest of her life realizing what a terrible bargain that was. The saddest part isn't that Sarah lost an inheritance. The saddest part is that she lost me, and she doesn't even realize it yet. She's living her life, probably assuming that I'll always be there when she's ready to come back, that my love will always be available when she decides she needs it again. She doesn't understand that love, even grandmother love, even unconditional love, can reach a breaking point where it transforms into something else entirely. Indifference. I hope this story serves as a wake-up call for anyone who's been taking their family for granted, anyone who's been treating love as if it's guaranteed rather than earned, anyone who's been assuming that the people who care about them will wait forever while they figure out what really matters. Don't make Sarah's mistake. Don't let pride or stubbornness or selfishness cost you the relationships that truly matter. The people who love you deserve your presence, your gratitude, your effort, and your time. They deserve to be prioritized, appreciated, and valued. They deserve to know that their love matters to you, that their support makes a difference in your life, that their presence is a gift you don't take for granted. If you have people like this in your life, tell them today. Show them tomorrow. Make sure they know how much they mean to you before it's too late. And to Sarah, if you're somehow watching this, I loved you for 31 years with everything I had. I supported your dreams, funded your mistakes, and believed in your potential, even when you didn't believe in yourself. All I ever wanted in return was to matter to you, to feel like more than just a source of financial support, to be included in your life, rather than contacted only when you needed something. You chose to exclude me when I faced the possibility of death. You chose silence over compassion, pride over love, resentment over family. Those choices have consequences, and you're about to discover exactly what they cost you. But the money isn't the real loss here. The real loss is the relationship we'll never have, the grandmother you'll never know again, and the love you threw away because you couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone when it mattered most. Your inheritance is going to people who understand the value of love, support, and showing up when it matters. The children who will receive life-saving heart surgery because of my donation have families who never leave their sides. The employees who will inherit my business have shown me loyalty and appreciation for over a decade. The students who will receive scholarships understand that education is a privilege to be treasured, not an entitlement to be squandered. These people will use my legacy to build better lives, stronger families, and more meaningful relationships. They'll understand that what I'm giving them is precious and rare, and they'll treat it accordingly. You had the same opportunity for 31 years, and you chose to waste it. Now others will benefit from what you couldn't appreciate. If this story resonates with you, if it makes you think about your own relationships and the people you might be taking for granted, please share it. Leave a comment about how you're going to show appreciation for the people who love you. And remember, the people who care about you deserve your effort, your time, and your presence, not just when it's convenient for you, but especially when it's not. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone, somewhere, make better choices than the ones that led us all to this point. I hope it reminds people that love is precious, that family is what you make it, and that some opportunities, once lost, can never be recovered. The greatest tragedy isn't that Sarah lost millions of dollars. The greatest tragedy is that she lost the chance to be loved unconditionally by someone who would have given her everything, who did give her everything, and who received almost nothing in return. Money can be earned again, but a grandmother's love, once squandered, is gone forever.